Hello everyone, my name is Carol Nyman. I at one time was the historian for Providence City, Providence, Utah, and I came in contact with a lot of pioneer histories, and I have a few volumes of them and they're just starting to fade, so I thought it'd be kind of fun to put these online for people to listen to. They're hard to read, but I think I can work through this. The first one is An Early Pioneer History of Providence and Reminiscence, written by Ella Campbell, from material which she gathered from the pioneers. So she actually gathered this history from the actual first pioneers, and she compiled it the 5th of February, 1914. In the summer of 1857, the first prospective settlers came to this side of the valley. They were John Dunn, Boyle, Nephi, Sam, and Joseph H. Campbell. They decided on the land they wanted, plowed the first furrow from about where Soren Paulsen's home is, now west to D.R. Matthews' land. They stayed about 1 week, looking around, hunting and fishing. They then went back to Salt Lake City. It was about this time that the people had to send out men to meet Johnson's army. It was in the spring of 1859 that the first settlers came here to stay. The very first ones was Ira Rice, Hopkins Matthews, whose daughter Elizabeth came with her father to help him prepare a home for the family who came later. A few days later, John F. Madsen, William Fife, Charles Rommel, and others arrived. They began the work of erecting houses, making roads, and building bridges. The first summer, the little colony was presided over by Samuel Campbell. In November of '59, the ward was organized with Robert William Budge. The first house was built in the form of a fort. It was 2 rows of houses facing each other, with a road between, and they were built close enough to form the walls of the fort. The object in building that way was for the protection against the Indians. The first meeting was held in a log house belonging to J. F. Madsen and William Fife, each person bringing their own stool or bench for them. They decided to build a schoolhouse, but they had a fine set of house logs on the ground for it. Brother Peter Mon, presiding elder of the section, came over to Logan one day and asked what they were doing with them. Then they told him. He asked, "Are there any more like them in the canyon?" "Oh, yes," they said. "Plenty of them." All of them, well then, suppose we take these and build Apostle Ezra T. Benson a house with them, and you can get out some more for your schoolhouse. They said, "All right, we will do that." So they hauled them to Logan and helped build Brother Benson's house. They got out some more of their schoolhouse, which was built first in the corner where the tithing offices now stand. It was a good room with a large fireplace on each end. It was larger than was needed for meetings at that time, so they had a movable partition of lumber put in that they pulled down to make the rooms the size they needed. They then used it for parties. It was raised up in the cable. They danced by firelight with the help of a few tallow candles, and Sister Elizabeth Fife says, "It did not make any difference if the floor was made of rough lumber and had big cracks in. We used to have such a good time." Ren Riston played the violin, and sometimes Al Harris came over and played the violin as well. He also taught us 2 new dance steps. When the town was laid out in blocks and streets, the schoolhouse was moved just south of where the church or hall is, as it was called now. It stood for many years, being used as a meeting house, schoolhouse, dance hall, and theater. There was a good dramatic company when it came to town. Phil Marquette of Salt Lake City would come every year to perform with them. They gave performances in most of the towns in the valley. Brother Henry Bullock took part in the line of work. Brother John Tyre took quite an influential part in getting immigrants to the place. In the summer of 1860, he made 2 trips to Salt Lake to West to help meet immigrants and induce quite a number to come with him. Among the brothers that came with him were Jacob Furman, Jacob Neef, Alders, and Creasy's, and others. His brother Fred and mother came that fall. He also brought one young lady immigrant to come and help him build a home. Her name was Miss Beretta Worley. On the 8th of October, brought her to Cache, and they were married on the 4th of the next month. This was the first marriage to take place in the town. The ceremony was performed by Brother Durfee, and he had been the justice of the peace. A few years earlier, Brother John W. Madsen was married in Salt Lake. Sister Madsen was the first school teacher in the town. The first child born in Providence was William Thompson's daughter. She was born in the fall of 1860. She is Samuel Spring's mother-in-law. While I am telling about marriages, I may as well tell you of the next one which took place. 2 months later, and the first day, Brother Joseph H. Campbell and Elizabeth Matthews, having the principal at that time, asked Brother Campbell how he got his outfit to be married with, which it consisted of, and this is what he told me. When I came to Providence to settle, they did not give me the land I picked out on my first trip, but allotted me 15 acres about where George Hansen's home is. When I was ready to get married, I sold the right to that land and got 2 wild Texas steers and 5 sheep. I took my steers to Salt Lake and traded them for enough wool material to make a dress, 6 plates, 6 cups and saucers, 6 knives and forks, and a small brass kettle. Our first bedstead was made with 1 post, then a piece running into the wall each way with boards crossed. Then we had a straw tick, 3 good quilts, sheets, and pillows. After I was married, I brought a bake kettle with the lid broken in several places. The blacksmith struggled with it and strapped them together. Brother Fred Tyre was the blacksmith, and he remembers making the nails with hinges for Brother Campbell's first cupboard. The hinges cost $2 a pair. Brother Tyre said that Brother Campbell had an exceptionally good outfit for those times. Most of them had to be satisfied with 2 tin plates, knives and forks, and cups, and perhaps a sheet of iron bake kettle, and also without much bedding. He himself had a bearskin and straw tick when he started. Brother Fred Tyre went to Salt Lake in 61 to see if he could be as successful as his brother John in finding a young lady and immigrant. He decided he met the train that the first one who offered him supper he would ask to be his wife. Miss Christina Schuler gave him some supper, so he followed up with his decision and brought her to Cache to his brother's home. Soon after coming here, she went to Logan to work for Brother J.H. Martineau's family. She stayed there 3 months, and her wages for that time consisted of an old grindstone, about 2 bushels of oats, and a piece of old clothing to make a quilt top with. Then she came back here, and we were married February of 1862. The manner in which Brother Fred and John Tyre got the first shoes for their wives is quite interesting. They had worn out the moccasins brought from the Indians and could not get any more, and so they were barefoot. They could not buy any shoes because there was none to get. They tried to buy leather to make them some. The tanner would not sell them any, but he told them they could earn some if they would get him a card of 2 of pine bark, which he used in tanning would let them have enough leather for 2 pairs of shoes. They thought that would be easy as they started out prepared to camp all night. They peeled the bark as high up on the tree as they could reach, then rolled it up. It took them 2 days to get their load. They loaded the line by laying 2 poles in the axles of the wagon, then laying the rolled bark across and trying it in the axles of the wagon. And then, as good as they could get it, they would have to keep loading all day. One would come up and one down over the rough roads. Then their load would be off. It took 1 day to get it to the mouth of the canyon and another to get it to the tanner. When they got enough leather, their shoes, Brother Uric Tabor made them. He had not learned the art of shoemaking, but they were thankful for them if they did not have any, and they were not the most shapely shoes to be seen. Beginning about in the year of 1862, the church went teamsters back to the States to help the immigrants who were too poor to come in. When they were called for a ward, the people rigged them out for the trip, giving them anything they could afford in the shape of teams, wagons, or provisions. Brother Joseph H. Campbell brought a small step stool home with him, and the first stove in the town. Sister Christina Tyre sent a small silk shawl by one of the teamsters to trade for a bake kettle. They also brought her a brass kettle, but it got run over on the way and mashed flat. Then Brother Tyre had to go with the ox team to Salt Lake to get it straightened out, but it paid for all the trouble, as they still have it. It was in 1862 that the first store was started in the valley. Brother Hezekiah Thatcher had a large room with a small stock of goods in Logan, but you could not purchase much with $5 then. Sugar sold at $1 per pound. A small box of matches was 50 cents. Calico $1 a yard. Factory $1 and $1.25 per yard, and so on. Then the place was the first settlers there were 10 men from where we were called to be ready at the call of a bugle to go and defend the settlers against the Indians. But they did not have much serious trouble. President Young's counsel to them has always been to feed the Indians rather than to fight them. Then the Indians would make a demand for a certain enough number of beef cattle and flour the people have to raise if on a very short notice. I well remember that they used to come into the town in a band, go to a house, lay out a blanket in front of the door. Then they would sing, dance, and play their crude musical instruments. They would stay until there was enough provisions on the blanket to satisfy them. Then they would go to another house until they had gone through the town. The children of the town followed them from place to place. Brother Mads Hansen and wife came here in 1862. They had a terrible experience on their journey, losing 4 children, Sister Hansen's mother, and 3 of her children. Brother Hansen paid immigration for 60 people. Sister Margaret Bullock also had a sad experience. Her husband stayed in England as a traveling elder, and she started alone, that is, without any relations or friends. She had only 1 baby. There was a woman who had smuggled a child past the officials that had measles, and there were 22 children that died on their way with that disease. Sister Bullock's among the rest. She gave birth to another on board ship and had to leave the vessel before the baby was but 1 week old. She was very weak and ill. One night they were sent into some stock cars. There was no shelter over them as a very severe storm came. Sister Bullock's baby was 9 days old. She stood as long as she could stand and then begged the people to crowd together and allow her to sit in one corner, and she sat there all night in the driving rain. In the morning they found their clothing and bodies covered with cattle lice. They had enough faith to think that all would be well when they got to Zion. We have in our town one of the members of the ill-fated handcart company. Sister Jane Griffith Fulmer was a member of the Martins Company that had such a terrible experience. She was only a child, 8 years old, but she said she will never forget what she went through. Here is a few of the incidences as she remembered them. There were 6 in the family when we started: father, 2 brothers, my stepmother, a sister 16 years old, and myself. It seems strange that more men and boys died than women and girls. My 2 brothers died on the way, and my father the day after we arrived in Salt Lake. That night that my oldest brother died, there were 19 deaths in the camp. In the morning, we could find their starved and frozen bodies right by the side of us, and knowing when they died, not until daybreak, revealed the ghastly sight of them. I remember 2 women that died while sitting by me. My mother was cooking some cakes of bread for one of them. When she had passed one to her, she acted so queer, then tossed it into the fire and dropped over dead. I remember distinctly when that terrible snowstorm came and how dismayed the people were. We were in a pitiful condition before, but the snow made it look hopeless. My stepmother took my little brother, then 6 years old, by the hand, and myself, and helped us along the best she could, while sister and father floundered through with the handcart. How he did struggle through that snow, tumbling over sagebrush and crying with the cold and hunger. Then when we camped, they had to scrape a place to camp, and there were not much to make a fire with. The rations of food became scarce. There were 4 ounces daily of an adult and 2 for a child, and sometimes a little piece of meat. Oh, I'll never forget it, never. When we arrived in Salt Lake, we were taken to the assembly room, and the people were asked to take as many into their homes as they could take care of. My father and mother were taken to one place, my sister and I to another. I did not see my father again. He died the next day. My mother was employed as a cook at the Townsend Hotel. I stayed there 3 weeks at the place where I was taken. Then Brother Milner, the one who had taken father into his home, heard that I was to be sent to poorhouse in Provo, and he said, "Never as long as I have a home." So he brought a wheelbarrow with some quilts and pillows in and took me to his home, where I stayed all winter, being in bed all the time. I did not stand on my feet until the 5th of March. I lost the first joints of 6 of my toes. My stepmother then carried me 12 blocks to a man's home who had been a friend of father's. He said he would keep us. I went there on my 9th birthday. Mother would carry me as far as she could, then put me down in the snow and would cry a while, and then we would go on. I did not stay there long. They said I would have to hunt for a new home. I did not know where to go, so I was in the woodpile crying when Brother William Eddington came along and wanted to know what was the matter. When I told him, he said, "You will come along with me, and you shall have a piece of bread as long as I have one to break." He afterward married my stepmother, and I had a home with him as long as I wanted to. In the year of 1866, the people had another difficulty to contend with, one of the worst they had encountered, as it brought them face to face with starvation. That was the grasshoppers. They came in such numbers that they entered the valley. They appeared to the people like a dense smoke or a great cloud. Wherever they lighted, they left the ground as bare as a floor. They fought them for 2 years and then they left, but made another appearance 10 or 12 years later. Then there was another struggle with time. In 1869, the ward started to erect the hall. It was quite an undertaking for the population and the condition they were in at that time. The next spring after it was started, Bishop William Budge was called to help settle Bear Lake Valley. Hopkins Matthews was presiding elder for a short time. M.D. Hammond had moved part of the family to Ogden in the spring of 1870 with the expectation of moving altogether in the fall. He was called back to Providence and ordained bishop in the fall of 1870. The hall was finished under his direction. They were 3 years in building. It was built of rock. Brother James H. Brown had in charge of the mason work, and Brother Henry Bullock supervised the carpentry work. Brother Reuben Kirkham the painting. He did decorative painting on the ceilings and painted scenery for the stage. It contained the best dance floor and stage this side of Ogden. There were excursions from Ogden and other places for dancing. The best dramatic companies came here. The town, when it was first settled, was called Spring Creek, but at that time, President Brigham Young made a visit to the place and suggested that Providence was a much more quotable name. The people then changed the title of the town to Providence. The next one I'd like to read to you is the social life of the pioneers. I do not know who wrote this, but it has good information in it, so I decided to read it to you. The pioneers crossed the plains in the tune of a brass band. Music and dance played a conspicuous part of the movement of the people while on the plains, and whenever a settlement was made in any remote part of Utah, the people naturally did something to relieve the strains of their hard work in the fields and on the roads. There were no drones in pioneer camps. Everybody worked and in turn cooperated in creating some kind of amusement for all. Many kinds of recreation diverted their minds from the daily routine, and thus their cares were dulled or momentarily forgotten. The favorite form of amusement was dancing. Even around the campfires on the plains, the people gathered for their dances. To the tune of the violin or accordion and the organ, they danced the quadrille and minuet. When coloners went out from Salt Lake City to build a settlement on a stream, some kind of musical instrument was, as a rule, carried along. When the first camp was made at a place to be permanently located, the people danced and praised God in song. When the school and meeting house was built in any settlement, the rough floor was soon prepared for the dance by a process of glazing wax. During the winter months, the people got to set apart certain nights for a gathering. A concert or dance was announced, and from far and wide the people came in bobsleighs, or if snow had fallen, or in the old family wagons. There was generally a fiddler, and to the fiddle was added the music of an accordion or organ. After the opening prayer, the fiddlers struck up as a signal for the march to begin, and round the different figures the men marched with their ladies on their arms. Many of the dances of these days had gone out of date, but they were still enjoyed. The dance consisted of a common movement, much as swaying or stamping, done by a group of men and women to the accompaniment of rhythmic cries and hand clapping. Chief among them were the quadrilles, polkas, Scotch reels, and minuets. A caller shouted out the calls from an elevated position. A waltz was now and then indulged in. Often a lady was compelled to leave the floor, for her baby was crying. No mother remained at home on account of the children. They were all brought along. Sometimes the revelers brought their suppers, and in some side rooms or in the main hall, an hour would be devoted to eating, and no one went away hungry. In the early morning, the dancers reached home, but at the break of day, the men and boys were at the barn doing their chores, and the women were preparing breakfast as usual. In some of the settlements, they were established. Brigham City, as early as 1853, had a dance school and had it opened. It was under the direction of John Hinnon. Mommy Must and twin sisters, and all the old dances were taught. Describing the first dancing school, a pioneer says, "In the early days, the people danced not only in the meeting houses, but in their own homes, and sometimes the barn floor was cleared and they would dance." In 1856, in Box Elder County, it was decided to build a courthouse, and among the first things done was the construction of a large platform where the workers might dance a quadrille or two before returning to their work, or where after the day's work they might go for a few hours of amusement. Admittance to the dances were paid for generally in kind. Squash, cabbages, potatoes, and other vegetables were taken at the door, and often the gay young man paid for his ticket and that of his partner with a piece of meat or a skin of some fur-bearing animal. In the home was quilting, carpet ragging, and corn husking bees. In trying to understand the hard life of the pioneers and how they stood, we must remember that they were banded together in a social unity that could not and has not been characterized in any similar movement in the history of the world. Their journeys across the plains were not pleasant ones. With all their hardships, they found thus time for varied entertainment and diversion. In the face of these untold hardships, these diversions participated in ofttimes to the tune of coyote howls, wolf shrieks, and other hideous noises of the nature's darkened wilderness, were in the means of acquiring that necessary courage to face the trials of tomorrow, which were as sure to come as the sun was to shine. Bound together with unity of faith and purpose, almost everything accomplished by the pioneers was done as a community basis. They worked together, they worshiped together, they suffered together, they played together and sang together, and they rejoiced together. The first entertainment indulged in during the marches across the plains consisted of dances about the camp bonfires, and sufficed, during which the pioneer travelers sang buoyantly, forgetting for a time their weariness and the obstacles to be faced on the morrow. The evening's entertainment included violin, vocal music, dancing to the tune of the fiddle, relating of campfire stories and experiences, spiritual giving, that encouragement elders gave of and games of checkers, dominoes, and any other article of entertainment were often in progress during these evenings. Dancing was not quite, however, because of the march scheduled for the next day. We learn from several pioneer journals that the merrymaking and fun was often in full swing when the bugle call, "Everyone had to go to bed," was sounded at 9 p.m. Every unusual happening was made the occasion for entertainment. Mock court trials for imaginary offenses formed a frequent amusement in the camps. Often a traveler or a friendly group of Indians were met with the pioneers, and the hours of interesting conversation and exchange of news resulted. In the first busy year of colonizing these societies, activities of the pioneers was not lost sight of a matter of fact, the strong desire for social union on the part of the people was a major factor in causing the pioneers to colonize in small communities up and down the state, unlike other attempts, with the small but sufficient chapel in the center of the town. First places of social life and amusement for the pioneers were the firesides of the log cabins homes of the pioneers. Family gatherings with the neighbors invited in were frequently means of passing away long evenings. These consisted of dancing, games, and other forms of amusement to suit the occasion. Sewing bees, spinning bees, and even literary circles were sponsored among the women, and these pioneer women finding time for this cultural enjoyment in addition to the multitask duties of pioneer life. Typical homemade amusements were quilting bees, birthdays, surprise parties, candy pulls, each followed by serving of homemade refreshments, outdoor activities much as foot races, games, sleigh rides in the winter, and a ride on the family hay rack in the moonlight of the summer usually ended up in the summoned neighbor's melon patch by permission of the owner. It was not as much a desire of the pioneers to utilize their leisure time in this way, for they didn't have much to spare. Instead, the dance halls were lighted in the early days with homemade candles or tallow dips. On holidays, the people engaged in horse racing, ball games, and foot races, and it was not uncommon for the youth of two towns to come together and engage in some contest of strength, like pull the rope. The people always had their holidays, and Christmas, Thanksgiving, the 4th of July, and the 24th of July were, as a rule, celebrated. Christmas Day was always fitting celebrated, though there were no gifts as we get today. One pioneer described her Christmas. I remember our first Christmas in the valley. We all worked as usual. The men gathered sagebrush, and some even plowed, for though it had snowed, the ground was still soft, and the plows were used nearly the entire day. Christmas came on Saturday. We celebrated the day on the Sabbath, when all gathered around the flagpole in the center of the fort, and there we held a meeting, and with a meeting we sang praises to God. We all joined in the opening prayer, and the speaking that day had always been remembered. There were words of thanksgiving and cheer. The people were hopeful and buoyant because of their faith in the great work they were undertaking. After that, the meeting, there was a handshaking all around. Some wept for joy. The children played in the enclosure and around a sagebrush fire. That night we gathered and sang, "Come, come, ye saints, no toil or labor fear, but with joy wend your way." This day we had boiled rabbit and a little bread for our dinner. All had enough to eat. There's another celebration that the people of Providence eventually worked into and had as entertainment, and that was the Pioneers' celebration of the 24th of July. In early as 1867, Providence, Utah had a record of celebrating the 24th of July. The people would congregate on Main Street and march the parade, which consisted of several immigrant wagons, some pulled by ox and horses, hand carts, townspeople dressed as Indians and cowboys, and each organization of the ward and business places would prepare a float. The parade would lead to the public square, where the immigrant wagons would form a circle and the Indians on their ponies would attack them. This created a lot of interesting, which in later years led to the production of pageants. After the performance on the square, a patriotic program would be held in the meeting house. The early days, a large community dinner would be served free for all. This was abandoned in 1872 because the crowd became too numerous to handle. After dinner time, there would be a foot race, games, and all sorts of entertainment for the youth, for the young folks. The winners would receive prizes. The older folks would visit on the grounds around the old willow bowery where they served free lemonade. In the early days, it was made in 50-gallon barrels. Lemon was not available, so it would be made of tartaria acid and lemon extract. They also served lemonade at the meeting in the morning. In later years, booths were set up and all kinds of confections and ice cream and drinks would be brought on the grounds. In the evening, there would be horse races on Main Street. This would create a lot of interest, being a farming community, and everyone had ponies in those days. After the races, everyone would assemble at the meeting house for a big dance. In later years, the meetings and dances were held in the Providence Pavilion, which was noted to have the best dance floor in the county. The dances in early days were mainly square dances, such as the plain quadrille, waltzes, quadrilles, Virginia reels, etc. In 1940, a pageant was staged called The Spirit of the West. Part of this pageant was actual facts and party imagery. It consisted of the pioneers and the wagons, handcarts, horsemen, Indians, trappers. It was staged in the public square and represented Brigham Young's coming into the Salt Lake Valley. The fair was a grand success and was presented in the morning of the 24th of July to over 2,000 people. The Indian attack displayed much enthusiasm, and a wagon was set afire and burned in the attack, which was an actual fact of the pioneer journey to the West. Approximately 500 townspeople participated in the performance. In 1941, the pageant was repeated with an entirely new cast. It was much improved and 2 new scenes able to the former year's performance. This performance took place 2 nights, the 23rd and 24th of July, with thousands of people attending from miles around. The pageant was written by Ann Netto, one of the pioneers' descendants. She was assisted by several committees in staging the performance. And now I'd just like to read to you, I would like to explain to you the forming of the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers in Cache County. The original Daughters of the Utah Pioneers came to pass in Salt Lake City when Annie Taylor Hyde, President John Taylor's daughter, decided they needed to compile a place for all the antiques and all the stories and things that took place in building in the West from the saints. And so they formed the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers. Elizabeth Matthews Camp was formed here in Providence, and I would like to read you the name of the camp and why it was named after her. Her name was Elizabeth Matthews Campbell. Elizabeth Matthews was born the 1st of March, 1845 in Cumnock, South Wales. Her father, Hopkins Matthews, mother Margaret Morris Matthews, 1 brother and 3 sisters crossed the plains with the handcart pioneers. During this journey, her father was stricken with rheumatism. This added to the already hard trials, and her mother then had to draw the cart with only the assistance of her eldest child, Margaret. Her mother carried Hopkins across rivers and across streams while she and her sisters pulled the cart. Their family first settled in Ogden, Utah, until in the spring of 1859 moved to Providence, Cache County, Utah. Here Elizabeth met Joseph H. Campbell. Their marriage was solemnized in the father's home by Peter Mon of Wellsville. They became the parents of 9 children. An ardent church worker, and she became a member of the First Relief Society organized in Providence, and was a counselor to Christina Tyre for 10 years. She also served for many years in the choir of that organization. June 6, 1911, when the first Daughters of Pioneer first organized in Providence, she was honored and became the first captain of the camp, which now bears her name. She served in that position until her death in 1916. Elizabeth was a true pioneer woman. She endured the hardships and trials of the women of that era, helping them to build a new home, a new life in a barren land. She was loved and respected by all that knew her. I have a copy of the first charter members of the Elizabeth Matthews DUP camp, and again I'd like to repeat that it was organized the 11th of June 1911, and these are the first chartered members: Elizabeth Matthews Campbell, Mary Matthews Marler, Margaret Matthews Rice, Elizabeth Rossiter Campbell, Emmeline Furman Zollinger, Eliza Frederick Chugg, Ella Hammond Campbell, Caroline Clausen, Mary Harmon Gibbs, Mary Tibbetts, Eliza Smith Matthews, Elizabeth Furman, Irene Campbell Vogel, Lula Hammond Hanson, and Margaret Campbell Hammond. I really enjoyed sharing this with you. I feel it's very important to share many of these stories, so I think I'm going to keep this up and keep telling these stories on YouTube, and I hope you're interested in listening to them as much as I enjoy telling them. So until next time, we'll talk to you again. Thank you.